Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Hi, and welcome to the 6th episode of the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. My name is Ryan Blake. I'm the founder and CEO of Extreme Sports Performance. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to Laurence Bloom. Laurence is the head of physical performance at Millwall Football Club, and I've known him for over 4 years. I'm going to be asking him the questions I ask all my guests: who he is, what he does, where has he come from, and what has he done along the way. What are the 3 key moments from his career so far? What are his top 3 areas of interest? What are the 3 most valuable things he's learnt to date? Who are his top 3 influences? What are his top 3 resources for information? What are his top 3 sports performance exercises or drills? And what are his top 3 pieces of advice in life, exercise and or sport? And finally, where can people find him? We continue to have a lot of freestyle chats in between questions. This one's the most technical one to date. We really enjoyed recording this podcast. We hope you enjoy listening to it. One more thing before we start. Come on, England! Here we go. Hi, Laurence. Welcome to the Extreme Sports Performance Podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate the opportunity to come and have a chat with you on this, especially as the new project you've got up and running. So feel privileged to be part of that.
Well, thanks very much, mate. I've been wanting to get you on for a while now, so I think we can get some really interesting discussion going and talk about quite a few things that I think people are going to benefit from hearing. So, to those who don't know who you are, could you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your background and the route the journey you've gone on professionally to get to where you are today?
Yeah, no problem at all. So, as you sort of introduced me, my name's Laurence Bloom. My current job role is actually, I suppose my title is Head of Physical Performance at Millwall Football Club. So I've sort of been involved in football over the last, I think, 12 to 13 years. So getting a little bit long in the tooth again now. I've had lots of varied and different experiences along the way. So hopefully what we talk about today, hopefully I can be quite insightful and share some of my own experiences, good and bad, that helped me sort of get to where I've got to today. So for the last 3 seasons now. So yeah, to cut a long story short, it's been a bit of an interesting journey, but predominantly sort of within football really. So sort of niche myself.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
To that field.
Awesome. Thanks for that insight, mate. I think that's really interesting, and it just goes to show. Look, I think these positions at different clubs and different teams are not easy to get to, and a lot of people have to kind of approach the route towards these roles in I suppose, an indirect manner, unless they're exceptionally lucky. So it's never easy to get, I think, a good job with a good team in a popular sport. It's a lot harder than just walking out of uni and just getting it offered on a plate. You have to kind of
for sure.
graft
sure.
a lot.
It's not easy, you're right. And like I say, I was quite lucky, even 10, 12 years ago, the market wasn't anywhere near as competitive as now. So I appreciate for the guys coming up now, and I see lots of young lads coming through that looking for jobs or looking for opportunities, and it's not easy, but it's all about getting your foot in the door, and ultimately once you've got that initial opportunity, then start making the most of it. If you've got a chance of then having a career or progression. So I think the hardest thing is getting that first point of contact or getting in somewhere. But I'm a big believer, so you make your own luck. So if you work hard and do the right things, then I'm sure people can go on to have a good career.
I mean, it sounds like you've had a kind of extensive journey in football from when you kind of first got involved in it to now. What would you say would be the 3 key moments from your career so far, mate?
I mean, obviously my time in football, like I said, it's been a good few seasons now, so there's lots of ups and downs along the way with it, as there is within all professional sport. I think I've been quite lucky in fact. I think in that time I've had sort of three promotions from a global point of view. So looking at, I think 2006-07, got promotion with Southend from League One to the Championship, and then my first season at Charlton, actually, when we went in, we actually won the league that season quite convincingly. I think it was like record points. That was 2011 and 12, and then obviously my first season at Millwall as well, we managed to gain promotion. So I've have been quite lucky in getting those experiences and those opportunities to work at those clubs at those particular times, and being part of that. So they've all been great experiences to go through. Also for me personally, I'm a big Spurs fan, so I don't know how well that's going to go down on this podcast, but actually we played Spurs away last year in the quarter-final of the FA Cup. We did get our pants pulled down, but it was nice to go there and play at the White Hart Lane, especially it was obviously the last FA Cup game that was going to be played there before they obviously knocked the stadium down. So that was a nice sort of personal achievement. I think sort of probably more meaningfully, looking more at the sort of relationships you build and sort of what I suppose the legacies that I've sort of been able to leave at the clubs I've been at. So I feel that everywhere I've sort of gone into, I've had a little bit of a blank canvas regarding from a sports science approach. There's not really been much in place. So I feel I've had the opportunity, each and every club I've worked within, has been able to then create a department, create an environment and a philosophy. And then as I've moved on, I feel I've been able to go on and sort of leave that legacy in place, whether that's through bringing in good members of staff and really developing the department. So for me, that's just something from a personal sort of standpoint that I'm really proud of. I can look back on, and I feel that probably in the last sort of 10 or 12 years, I've had a lot of interns or part-time staff that have come in that have now gone on to gain full-time employment, either within the club that I've been at, or gone on to gain employment elsewhere. So for me, that sort of gives me a lot of pride and satisfaction in terms of that sort of personal development with other people as well.
A couple of points you mentioned there, like being able to be involved in success in sport is great, but I find it's quite rare sometimes. If you're working within a sports science role, and to be able to experience those successes just kind of adds value to your time and in the role, and it just makes the job a little bit better, doesn't it? Depends what end of the result you're on, but it's still nice to be part of those big events.
Yeah, for sure. I think obviously depending what level you're working at, but I mean, if you're working with younger athletes, your emphasis is slightly different in terms of that long-term athletic development and seeing players maybe work their way through into the first team. I think that's a sort of key focus. I think when you're working at a senior level or first team level, everyone from the manager to the backroom staff is judged on sort of results, performances, and sort of the outcome. So it's a little bit of a different focus, but yeah, I think there's a lot of difficult times when you work in professional sport. So when the good times come along, I think you've got to enjoy them and sort of make the most of them, and sort of enjoy the ride, really.
Exactly, and as you say there, mate, it's very rewarding when you see the young players you've worked with, be able to go on to continue to perform at that next higher level for them, and kind of just to keep moving forwards in their career. It's like you almost become like a proud dad, almost, don't you? Like,
100%, yeah. And whether they progress within your own club or whether they go on and get moved to other clubs. I've quite lucky that I've worked with players that have come through either the academy or been in the first team set up at the club that I've been at, and then got moved to either Premier League clubs or gone on to play at a higher level. And a lot of the time, those players then actually text you or call you and sort of say thanks for all the work you put in, and sort of give you a little bit of an appraisal, give positive feedback, really. So that always goes down well. Good example, actually, we got. I used to work with Nick Pope, who was a young goalkeeper at Charlton Athletic, and he sort of had a little bit of ongoing issues with his knees, which we spent a lot of time sort of working on, sort of getting him stronger, making him a little bit more robust. And he's now gone on to sort of play at the World Cup. Well, he's third choice goalkeeper at the World Cup at the moment. So he's gone on to do great things, and he's even been texting me while he's away on training camp, just keep me updated. And these little things go a long way. To be part of that process of where he started his journey to where he is now is it's great to be part of. Yeah,
it's great, man. It's very rewarding, and it just makes. I mean, it's a hard job, and you spend a lot of time in the trenches, and you spend a lot of time away from home, and a lot of time, constantly in people's company, and like those kind of little bonuses with the odd text messages or the calls or just players being appreciative does kind of make it worth it, doesn't it? In the long run, and takes the pain of some of those not so good days away.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially in our role, we managers take the flak for results, and I think for us we can't get too high or too low with the results. We can't really go up and down. We have to stay quite level because we're working at sort of deeper level. And those results you get with players, whether it's coming back from injury or seeing players go through, that's just as rewarding for us as sort of winning games. So the rough with the smooth, but it's important that you sort of get that level of interaction with the players, and that feedback is does make you feel good when things are going well. Yeah,
exactly. And I think the last thing you said was when you've got interns or graduates who have come to kind of get experience and learn from you, it does take a lot of time. You have to invest a lot of additional effort in them, and it's not necessarily like a prerequisite of every role. I just think like the industry now seems quite open to wanting to be able to help people if they can, which I think is great. Because I know that I didn't have those opportunities when I was first starting out, and to be able to provide them to kind of like aspiring coaches or aspiring sports scientists today, like in the positions that I currently involved in, it I just feel you kind of given a bit back, which I think is important.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously it's a two-way relationship. So, for example, when we take on interns, they're coming here to learn and get experience and develop themselves. Ultimately, they're here to help me and help manage the players as well. So I think it does work both ways. I know recently there's been a lot of sort of negative media around sort of internships and sort of unpaid work, which I get to an extent. I do appreciate, people should be paid for the work and what they do. But unfortunately, I think we're the environment at the moment where we are working in a saturated industry. Unless people prepared to go and do some voluntary work.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Can get that experience really, really difficult to sort of crack or get into the industry.
Yeah.
So, I do get it's difficult when graduates come out and they're looking for work that, they ideally want something that's paid. But I said, for my advice to people out there looking to get in their foot in the door or gain those opportunities is that sometimes you might have to be prepared to sort of do some voluntary hours or some voluntary experience just to get that experience. My personal opinion at the moment is that a lot of students coming out of university aren't adequately prepared to go straight into working in competitive or elite sport. So that's where I think, internships and voluntary experiences are invaluable for people. And without those, it can be difficult to sort of go and get a career or to just get your foot in the door somewhere.
There's a newer trend now of graduates trying to get more experience whilst they are doing their degree or whilst they're at uni, rather than doing it when they leave. Because obviously, it's such a competitive profession. Especially the elite sport roles, that you're going to want to employ some with the qualifications, with the knowledge, but most of all with the experience. Because, as you say, if you just walk straight out of university into a dressing room full of professional athletes, you're going to find it difficult. Whereas if you've had experience managing them, coaches and managers as well, and your communication skills are of like the appropriate level, and you're used to kind of dealing with conflicts and things like that, then you're going to definitely find it easier. Whereas if you hadn't had any experience at all, it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said, I think this year we've taken a couple of interns, which go on a voluntary basis, but one of the lads we've taken on is actually kind of a bit of a sandwich course. So he's actually done 2 years of his degree. His third year now will be like a sort of gap year, so he's going out to get that experience and do a placement. And then he'll go back to his final year and do his sort of dissertation and finish off. But me personally, I feel that will stand him in great stead when he finishes compared to other graduates that may come out that haven't had that experience. He's almost got, he's one step ahead. So, I think for me, moving forward, I think a lot of universities should be looking at that. I was the same with my degree. I said it was in sports rehab, a slightly different field. But you had to do 2 compulsory internships or placements for a semester each. I think without those, I definitely would have been struggling coming out. So, I do appreciate it's a time and cost investment for people. But if you get the right internship, then it's invaluable. I do think it's invaluable.
So, just moving on, mate, what would you say your top 3 areas of interest are at the moment as a professional?
As my role in football, you sort of become a little bit of a jack of all trades. So you end up doing every day a little bit of everything. So the role's really diverse. Obviously, we work very closely with the medical team. We work very closely with the coaching team. We work closely with the chefs and the kitchen staff. So, we're covering anything from sort of bits of nutrition, obviously working very closely with the players. So it's pretty diverse in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis. I would say for me, sort of on a working day-to-day, I'd say my particular main areas of interest is going from my original background, so sort of the injury rehab. Really, really enjoy probably find like getting the most sort of effective results working with players coming back from injury. Like Brendan always says, injuries are opportunities. So when you've got a player injured, you can work with them one-to-one, you can get more sessions done with them, and you can actually see a lot more progression than when you're working with a squad. So for me, definitely the rehab side of it is really good, really beneficial. Just actually had a player I've just spent 9 months working with come back from an ACL injury, and he played his first 45 minutes of competitive football on Saturday. It was our first pre-season game, and just to see him out there playing is just so rewarding, especially when you've been sort of quite an integral part of the process. And sort of when someone's out with a long-term injury, there's a lot of you do get really close, and you do sort of build up a bit of like an emotional attachment with that person. So he actually come up after the game and gave me a bit of a hug and was a little bit choked up and a bit emotional, which brought a tear to my eye as well. So we've already touched on sort of like those relationships, but for me that's a real good side of the job. Just in general as well, I suppose as my role entails, it's just that it's quite a sort of generalised areas, but the physical preparation of players. So looking at both from like a performance aspect in terms of really trying to improve players physically. At times that can be quite difficult at first team level when you're playing sort of 40 to 50 games a season. So trying to be creative, trying to be clever, and increase our sort of player availability through the season. So this really ties in with all the sports science strategies that we use. Particularly, obviously, one thing we use quite a lot at the moment is looking at how we can manage player load. So a lot of stuff we do, the Tim Gabbett, training stress balance, acute chronic ratios, really trying to sort of develop that and look at ways that we can sort of implement that in our training and load management for players. I think they're sort of key areas, as well as say we do touch on nutrition and all other aspects of sports science as well. But I'd say for me they're the sort of three hot topics at the moment.
So I'm just going to touch on one of those, because what you just mentioned about load management is also one of my personal key interests, and I just think it fascinates me because I think it's an area that's always going to just keep developing, and like new ways and better ways of doing it are going to just keep coming up. So do you have like a load monitoring kind of system in place with the players, and that they have to fill out and complete in a certain time frame?
Yeah, well, obviously we track sort of different aspects of the players' sort of physical performance levels in different ways, and also for both an objective and subjective point of view. So each day the players, for example, will come in the morning and they'll have certain monitoring they have to do on a day-to-day basis. So every day they come in, they have to come in and complete a wellness questionnaire, which is on a laptop. We're just in the middle of changing systems at the moment. So last year we just had an Excel database that we set up and just ran it off that. This year we've moved on to more of like a player management system called Benchmark 54, for those that are familiar with that, which is basically a central database for all sports science and all medical information to go onto like a central hub. So the first thing they'll do is they'll come in and do their wellness questionnaire. Certain days in the week, so we match day -2 or match day +2, they have certain sort of markers they have to be assessed on. So we'll look at some flexibility screening, we'll look at some movement screening, and some basic strength testing, just to see if players are showing any signs of different movement or any signs of fatigue. So that's normally twice a week. And then we also track other things like jumps and power output and body fat and things like that, sort of bi-weekly.
Yeah.
Body weight. But on a day-to-day basis, obviously from a training point of view, we're tracking player load through GPS and heart rate. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with GPS these days. It's not anything new anymore. But looking at sort of key metrics, so the obvious ones being things like total distance covered in training, how much high-speed running players have done in training, how much sprint distance players are covered, total sort of load within a session, and then sort of more subjectively just taking things like RPEs as well, and also heart rate value, so looking at time spent in different heart rate zones as well through different training sessions. So we do collect, obviously that's just an overview, we do collect a lot more than that, but then sort of global markers we look at. And then obviously we're running lots of different sort of spreadsheets, both through our own Excel databases that we've set up, and also through Benchmark, this system we use to sort of track sort of what we call acute or chronic training loads across those different metrics, really.
Yeah.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21+. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I mean, we've just started, or I've just started using a new GPS system at St Paul's School with rugby, and it's got an inbuilt heart rate monitor in it as well. And it's fascinating, and we really are quite excited about the information that's going to give us this season.
Yeah.
Because we had a pretty good season last year, but obviously we didn't have the access to those devices, so I feel that it's going to really add value to the programme. Just on that subject, do you find that if a player's like acute chronic workloads do spike or do drop kind of above or below the ideal ranges you'd want them to be in, do you find that there's sometimes a generic pattern with their welfare monitoring as well, if that happens, or are they not that related?
To be honest, I'm not sure. At the moment, it's that sensitive. But we've really been tracking this now closely for probably just over the last year, since we really started getting trends with certain players that have maybe been seen sort of spikes in that workload over a period of time that then have obviously subsequently gone on to pick up an injury. But then we've also seen players that have seen significant spikes in workload that have not got injured. So it's not always a guaranteed marker. And obviously when we look at sort of training load per se, for a training session, there's so many different metrics or variables involved in that. So although you might see maybe a spike in total distance covered, that might not be a risk factor for a particular player. But if you looked at maybe explosive distance or high intensity accelerations and you saw a spike in that, then that may be more of a precursor than sort of total distance or volume, for example. So I think it's quite individual to the player what they're going to be more sensitive to in terms of changing load and what the key metrics for that player. So for example, if you've got like say a central midfield player who's not that explosive, maybe more aerobically conditioned, more of a slow twitch endurance type player, he may be able to tolerate higher spikes in training volume. Whereas if you look at maybe something like a striker or a wide player who's more explosive, more fast twitch muscle fibres, they then might not react as well to an increase in volume of total volume of training. So I think you've got to first of all understand what you're looking at, which key variables, and then it's about understanding the sort of DNA or the makeup of a player and how they may respond differently to the different metrics you're looking at. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. That's from sort of what I've seen and my sort of perception of it at the moment.
And I think ultimately the reason why you go into so much detail and so much depth is to give players that individualised, training overview and to manage them, each player, individually, rather than just give one size fits all.
Yeah, 100%, mate. I think from us, we run with a small squad. So last year we ran with a 20-man squad pretty much most of the season.
Yeah.
So the key thing the manager stresses to us is player availability. Now, Millwall being traditionally a Millwall club, he wants us to be the fittest team and the most physical or hardest team battling-wise in the league. So trying to tick all those boxes in the same sense is not always easy. So obviously we're trying to overload players as much as we can to get them fit. Obviously we're always on the edge of a cliff regarding to how they can fall off. So that monitoring does enable us to then, if we see a player that we think is just going to fall over the cliff slightly, then we can either pull them back or sort of individualise their training loads, as you said. Obviously working within a team sport, within their training, I'd say a lot of it is, when I say generic, is team-based. So they're doing team sessions. And then it's our job really to feel if we do need to individualise certain components of that, whether that's to, they need maybe pushing harder because they're not fit enough to then work with them individually. If they're, lacking strength or robustness, we need maybe to supplement, extra work in the gym that they're doing. So we do try and have an individual approach, but there still is a sort of generic team conditioning sort of approach below that sort of level, if you know what I mean. So not everything's individualised all the time, but we do individualise as of when we feel is necessary.
I think one thing I found very useful, mate, with having access to this data is if the player does get injured, it gives you a much more clear idea of where they need to get back to and where they left off from a rehab point of view.
Yeah, going back to the rehab side of it, can be really useful. And unfortunately, the way we're still working at the moment is with a lot of the monitoring and especially the key chronic stuff is that we don't always know what's the safe zone for a player until they get injured, which sometimes is a bit unfortunate because ideally, obviously, we want to try and stop that injury from happening. So sometimes you are looking back retrospectively, and it's not only until you look back at it when someone's injured that you can actually see sort of maybe reasons why or spikes. So actually, give an example of that. We had a player last year, a striker, fast twitch player, big, powerful striker. He was in and out of the team first half of the season, and then he managed to pick up a little thigh injury. I think it was about September time. So we rehabbed him, got him back fit. It was only out for a couple of weeks. In and out of the team again, and then he went for I think a 14-day period, or maybe a little bit longer. I think it was a 21-day period actually, where he didn't get any game time at all. So it was a 3-week period. And then that was around Christmas time. So we played Boxing Day, we had a home game, I remember it quite clearly. And after 45 minutes, he sort of came at half time. He looked like he was sort of blown up, really, just looked knackered, fatigued. He said, "Look, I'm struggling a little bit, so there's not much we can do during the game." Went out second half. I think about 10 minutes in the second half, pulled up with his hamstring. So it wasn't until manager or the nature of the game, he'd done, I think it was about 175 metres sprint distance just in the first half.
Yeah.
His average sprint distance in the game leading up to that, I think, was about 60 metres for the whole game. And then what we'd seen as well over the previous 3 weeks training, he hadn't done more than, I think, about 20 metres sprint distance in a training session.
Yeah.
So off the back of that, we were then able to make sure on a weekly basis he wasn't playing games, that he was getting, a much higher level of sprinting exposure within the training week.
Yeah.
Which we were quite strict with. So it was, even, for example, on a Saturday after a game, if he hadn't come on or he'd only done 15, 20 minutes, he'd have a specific training protocol he had to do, which would consist of warm up and some sort of work, and then doing a certain number of sprints, and then we finish that by doing some sort of posterior chain hamstring strengthening work as well. So his sort of post-match conditioning was always geared around what we found based on his previous injury. So that was just something we picked up with him. But yeah, also, as you said there, Ryan, coming back from injury. So now, obviously, we have sort of a lot of testing we do with players, a lot of objective markers we have.
Yeah.
So it's, again, before we had GPS, you'd often get grey areas with coaches that would say, look, this player's fit, want him back. We weren't too sure. So sometimes you'd hold them back, sometimes you'd push them back into training. Occasionally that would obviously lead to players maybe breaking down, going back in too soon. So what we're able to do now is establish a return to training criteria. So we work quite closely with the medical team, and each player will have certain physical parameters or criteria they have to achieve before they're then sort of deemed fit to go back to training, which is quite good for us. That when we know we're putting players back in, that we know they're ready to go back in. And again, those markers can be different based on individual players' needs.
That is really useful, mate. And you've just kind of reminded me of the direct link really I found with when I used to working in professional cricket, especially with fast bowlers. There was a direct link between the frequency of hamstring injuries directly related with the average amount of high speed running they did each week. And we did find that those players who were a little bit more susceptible.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
To injury, had to just do that little bit more high speed running than the others who weren't, and that seemed to be a really good protecting factor for them. And wouldn't have really noticed it if we hadn't kind of been tracking it, but we kind of stumbled across it by accident, and it did actually make a big difference. And the other thing we did find was also the efficiency of their running stride. So we do a lot of kind of running drills or technical based running drills to help with that, and those two things combined did actually end up having a big protecting effect, ultimately making more players available for the coach, which is at the end of the day what you're there to do, really, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you said, ultimately, I don't want to be using sort of GPS markers to dictate to the coaches or players what we're doing. But they should definitely there, like you said, be influencing what we're doing and helping sort of supplement work in there or reduce work for a particular player based on what we're seeing and what the player needs. I think you've touched on it there. Actually, there's quite a lot of research now coming out about the effects of high speed running on building a protective mechanism for hamstrings.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that you've sort of seen that in your practice as well. And for us, it's something that we definitely now make sure we have on a weekly basis. Obviously, depending on games, but if, for example, we have a clear week, Saturday week, then on a Tuesday, we normally make sure we're hitting the minimum criteria on our high-speed running. And it's something, again, I think since we've had that, as well as making sure we're getting regular velocities exposures, that I think is definitely helping. I think at the moment there's still that sort of grey area with both S&C coaches, sports scientists and coaches that, especially once the season comes, that less is more. And I still feel we've got to be a little bit careful at times, but I think players can do more, and that I think that regular exposure to certain components of training does help, especially with the high speed running and sprinting exposure for sure.
Do you, as a sports science and medicine team, if you do see a player who looks like they're getting slightly closer to the edge of the cliff, do you have like a complete say in whether or not they play, or is that more of a kind of a discussion with the coach and the coach makes a decision?
Yeah, I think more the second one, mate. I don't think, our role, we're part of the team, so I don't think for us to have the ultimate decision whether a player plays or not, I don't feel is right.
Yeah.
I think if you've got the backing from the manager, particularly, and the coaching staff, then ultimately, your recommendations probably will be listened to.
Yeah.
But like I said, unfortunately, we're in an environment where, we're very results driven and short term. So at times the manager may go against your opinion, and sometimes we're not right either. So sometimes you might make a recommendation to not play a player, and then go and play and maybe go on and win the game for you. So it's a difficult one. I don't want to be in a position where I pull a player out unnecessarily unless they're actually injured. But yeah, I mean, I said I've got a good enough relationship with the manager where he will definitely listen and take on board our opinions regarding players. And for me, ultimately, I'll see it as, for example, if I know in the beginning of a week that a player is, feeling fatigued or carrying a slight niggle, it's my job, I see it, to manage that player through the week to get him available for the game on Saturday. So I'd rather sort of focus in on managing workload or implementing certain strategies through the training week as opposed to trying to avoid sort of match play as such. Doesn't always work out like that, but in our ideal world.
I think also with the pressures of, as you say, the pressures of results and sometimes the personalities of certain people around you make that even harder. And I've been in those positions quite a few times myself, and it is quite difficult having to balance everything. But you're ultimately there to do your best to look after the players, to get them in the best nick, and use all the information that you have around you to inform the best decision, really, for the coach.
Yeah, 100%, mate. And I think that's where we said that we talked about having the GPS data at times can really help you get your point across with certain things. So, we can show them graphs, we can show them data, whether players, dropping off in games or, showing signs of fatigue, we can show them the data for that. So definitely helps, obviously, when you're trying to sort of state your argument. And like you said, unfortunately, we work in an environment where there's a lot of cooks. So, it might be in a morning meeting with 12 members of staff, which is myself, the physio, 7 or 8 coaching staff. You've got, admin people in there, and everyone wants an opinion, or has an opinion. So I think really it's just trying to get your point across in the best way possible. And for me, like I said, it comes down to sort of having good relationships. So if you can build up a good rapport with the coaches, with the manager, and have that level of trust, then you're halfway there a lot of the time. Yeah.
No, I completely agree, mate. It's good to hear that you ultimately have experienced the same challenges and I suppose been faced with the same problems. Like I'm sure many people listening have too. So it's nice to know that we're all kind of doing things in a similar way to kind of end up working towards the same result. So it can make you relax a bit more when you hear someone else say it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I talk to a lot of try and keep in contact with other people that work in the sport because you're always trying to, discuss things and come up with new ideas and sort of see what other people are doing. So, yeah, we're not on our own. I don't think a lot of people I speak to do have the same challenges. But, I'm quite lucky in the fact that I was actually, selected and brought in by the manager as someone I sort of knew previously as a player. So I think that always helps when you're going into somewhere and you already know the person in charge, that you've already got a bit of a level of trust and respect there. But, on the other sense, you can quite easily lose that when things don't go well or you make a couple of bad decisions or, a few injuries and things like that. It can quite easily be lost. So you're always on a bit of a knife edge even then.
Yeah. It's a tough gig, mate. But, it's something that we enjoy doing and love doing. So it's, you're prepared to take that risk, aren't you?
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to love this. If you don't, you've got to love it. You've got to be passionate about it. Otherwise, you think you're in the wrong job because it does, as we said, demands of it do take your life over. I think once our season starts, well, actually pre-season started 2 weeks ago. My next holiday's now not till May. My next weekend off now is probably not till May. So I'm quite lucky that my wife's quite patient and she gets it. Doesn't put too much pressure on me to be at home too often. I think she actually quite likes it when I'm not there, to be honest. Between me and you. So no, it does take your life over. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. When I've missed, family and friends' birthdays because they've been on a weekend or, friends going away for the weekend, you can't go. People don't see that side of the job. It
I completely agree, and as I say, like I've spent up until the point now where I'm working predominantly in a school environment, and it's a little bit more of a structured daily schedule, weekly schedule. Like the 4 years in cricket I've had and the 4 years in tennis, they do take up a lot of your time, and especially if you're travelling and going to different competitions, different matches, etc., etc. You can sometimes find yourself like not at home for like every 7 or 10 days. You come back, like kind of do some washing, and then you're back on the motorway again, staying in another hotel. And it's very demanding, especially when you've got a family or you don't see, you other halves as often. It can be tough, and I think that's one thing a lot of people struggle with, but they're never really prepared for until they have to kind of be faced with that reality. So it's just, if anyone listening who can't wait to get a job in pro sport, I think you just need to be aware of like what you have to sacrifice for that job, and the things that you may have to give up in order to fully commit to what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's definitely a life or a lifestyle as much as it is a job, and like I said, it's demanding. As you said, you're away from your family a lot. You're travelling all around the country. You're on sort of beck and call really, and you can't take holidays when you want to take holidays. So I don't want to say I'm not moaning it because I'm so used to it now. Like it doesn't sort of bat an eyelid really. You just get used to just how it is. But yeah, people do need to be aware of if they are coming into industry of what it involves and what it's all about. And I think that comes back to getting out there and getting early opportunities and experiences to see what it's all about before you sort of go and get yourself a full-time job in it. Know what you're getting yourself into before you start, really.
Yeah. So just to kind of move forwards, mate, the next question I wanted to ask you would kind of more generalised, or more, I suppose, more of a holistic question about what are the 3 most valuable things that you've kind of learned in to date in your career?
Yeah, I think, when I first sort of graduated and started working in football, like I said, similar to yourself, mate, we were quite early in it, and we didn't have mentors or people to guide us and teach us the way sort of I try and guide and teach people that come in now. So I've sort of had to go on and probably make a lot of mistakes and learn by those mistakes on the way. So, and I'm going through a few different clubs as well. I've tried doing things different ways at different clubs and sort of trying to work out what works best and what hasn't worked so well. But I think similarly to training, progressive change is key. So I've been a bit of a bull in a china shop a couple of times and roughed up people's feathers the wrong way, or it's not gone down too well. I think one of the major things now, as I found when I go into a new club, it's listening to people, speaking to people, understanding the philosophy of the club, the dynamics of the club, and taking as much on board about the club and how the club works and the culture of the club before trying to make too many changes. Like I said, I've been lucky in the fact that the clubs I've been at, there has been scope, a bit of a blank canvas where there's not been much in place from both a sports science and strength conditioning point of view. So I've been able to make those changes as I've gone along. But I'll definitely say, don't try and do too much too soon and try and make it nice and progressive. And what works at one club doesn't necessarily work at another club, depending on the type of characters, type of players, and the coaches' views and values as well. So I think you have to take all that into consideration and take everything on board before you start trying to do things your own way or put your own stamp on things, and take everything in. So that's probably a key one. I always used to think when I first sort of graduated, it was all about knowledge. So just come in, show people what you know. At a certain way, everyone had to be doing certain exercises, or everyone had to be getting stronger. Everyone had to be getting in the gym. Everyone just had a belief in the philosophy of the way I worked, and I didn't probably have much flexibility within that. And that was said because I was inexperienced at the time, and that was what I've been taught at uni. You just want to come in and sort of dump your own sort of ideas and model in place. But what I've learned, again, just taking it a little bit more slowly and doing things more progressively. And as we've already spoke about, mate, is having a much more sort of individualised approach with players. Good example we've got here is a player called Steve Morrison. So I've worked with him for about just over 2 and a bit years now. And sort of first thing he said to me when I came in, I sort of manager was sort of Mark McCarthy, and he said, look, hates the gym. He's 34 years old, I think he was at the time. He's had a bit of a problem with a previous S&C I sort of, first day I was in, I sort of pulled Steve and I said to him, look, Steve, I said, look, I've come in, this is my role within the club, this is what I'm looking to do, and this is where I'm looking to take the club. And I just sort of put it on him a little bit and said, look, for me, I've been told that, you're club captain, you're one of the key senior players here. I said, I've got no interest in coming here and trying to make you do things you've never done before. I said, look, you obviously know your body. I just said, look, I'm here for you. If there's anything you need from me or I can do to help you perform, just come and knock on my door. And I just sort of try to get them on board that way. Whereas maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, I might have been a bit more sort of bullying and trying to shot regard that. So I think I've sort of learned to sort of, just take things in my stride, be a little bit more relaxed and, individual, I will say, take into individual requirements a little bit more. And since then, actually, Steve does actually now go in the gym a little bit. It's not a lot, but it's small progress, so we are getting there. So I think another one is just coming in and building good relationships. I think, however much you know as a practitioner, if people don't have that personal relationship with you or you're able to interact with people on that level, I don't think your knowledge is going to come through as well. So I think it's just being able to go in and build relationships with the people around you. So, but whether that's the medical staff, the chef, like I said, the kit staff, the groundsman, we have to deal with so many people on a day-to-day basis. We're sort of like the middle cog, I think, that makes all the other cogs go round a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So I think those building relationships all round does help you moving forward. Like I said, on a day-to-day basis, going and having chats with the groundsman about, what area we're going to use, what markings we need, if we want the pitch watered, if the pitches are too hard. So, having those conversations on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, chatting with a chef every day regarding, what menus he's doing, what food they're having on certain days, what level of carbs, protein. So I think just going in and just being able to, just interact with people and, as I said, key with the players as well. If they feel they can talk to you and that you've got their best interest at heart, they'll buy in a lot more than if you just try and go in and get everyone doing what you want them to do. So that's definitely something I've become better at over the years. Probably as you get older, I think you get a little bit calmer as well in your approach. So when you're a little bit younger, a little bit more gung-ho. So I've definitely mellowed out in my old age as well, mate, for sure.
Yeah.
Which I think helps. And I think final one probably just being open-minded and a good listener. Sort of touched on that. I think I used to think my way was the only way, but there's definitely more than one way to skin a cat. And other people, coaches, medical staff do have really good ideas that maybe I wouldn't have had. So what I've learned again is just be able to take other people's ideas and opinions on and continuously keep learning and adapting. Even now, I've worked in the game probably, like I said, 12, 13 years, but by no means sort of finished article. Every day you're learning, you're developing and adapting. And I think the day you sort of stop trying to learn and take things on board is a day you're probably going to go backwards and your sort of career could be possibly on the way down. So, just try and keep an open-minded and sort of forward-thinking as I can on a day-to-day basis, mate.
Great insights, mate. There's a lot of things you said there where I was kind of just nodding to myself, like quietly in the background here, where I'm thinking, done that. I know exactly what he means. So, thanks for sharing that.
No worries.
Who would you say, are your top 3 influencers you've had, professionally throughout your career?
Yeah, I'll keep touching on it, the fact I didn't have an actual sort of role model or mentor as such, so I had to always sort of go out and sort of try and find people to speak to or find people's research or reading books to read. So I've looked at, I've always gone to like multiple sources. So I've looked at people within football and what work they're doing and tried to sort of replicate that at times. And then I've also gone outside of football and looked at sort of the big hitters outside of football to see what ideas I can then maybe use or take on board to bring in football. So I think from within football itself, from a football context, people like Tony Strudwick, who, for those who aren't familiar with him, he's been at Man United for years. He's actually now just gone to Wales as head of performance. But he was sort of at the forefront of sports science in football, probably before, a fair few years before I was even in the game. So really just trying to follow the work of Tony and what he's done. Lucky enough, a number of years ago to go up and shadow Tony for a few days and see what he was doing up there at United, and that was a great experience for me. Spend some time with him. Another guy I follow quite closely, sort of in football at the moment, but comes from a non-football background, would be Ben Rosenblatt.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Currently sort of head of performance at England. He's done a lot of good work out there and put some stuff out there. Luckily, I've met Ben a few times and sort of picked his brains on a few bits and pieces. So he's another good guy that I try to follow. And then a bit of a controversial one, actually, from more of like a football periodisation would be a guy called Raymond Verheyen, who's a bit of a conflicting character. From a personal point of view, I think he can be a little bit difficult in terms of his views and how he puts his points and philosophies across. But also within that, I think he's got some really good concepts and ways of getting football conditioning done. So sort of try and take some of his work and put that into my sort of planning, my periodisation. So a lot of my football specific stuff taken actually from him. Just not too keen on the way he delivers and how he criticises certain people, but well, that's for another day. So they're the sort of three guys within football. I'd say there's probably three other influences I look at from outside of football more recently that, try and take on board some of their work. So probably Vern Gambetta. I was lucky enough probably it was about 2004 when I first actually went on a conference and saw Vern deliver. So for those of you who haven't had a chance to go and see Vern deliver a workshop or a conference, what a guy he is. Knows his stuff inside out. And he's really good just from like an applied movement point of view, so it's not football specific. It's just general athleticism, and there's a lot of stuff that's really transferable that he does, and he's got hundreds of years experience as well. So a lot of good stuff I've taken from Vern. Another one I was probably should say would be Dan Baker regarding sort of MAS training, something that I sort of implement within our training, particularly pre-season. So I follow a lot of his work, and then finally probably from outside of the football will be sort of Tim Gabbett and the work he's done regarding sort of acute chronic loads, really. I'll say that. Sorry, mate, you asked for three, I've given you six.
No, that's great, mate.
I've sort of tried to be three football and three
no worries.
More general.
I'm going to put links to all these different people in the show notes, so people who aren't quite familiar with them can just click on the link in the show notes, depending on what listening platform you're using, and then you'll be able to explore more about them. I used to work in the same a bit in Bisham Abbey when I used to work in tennis. At the same time, Ben was there working with the English Institute of Sport. He was kind of heading up the intensive rehab unit, and we always kind of like would meet in passing and kind of just quickly chew the fat about this and that, but I've probably seen more of him on the telly lately than I have any of the players. He's always there in a dugout, like chucking water onto the players, or it's great to see that him kind of like properly in the mix of it. So I've had some good experiences and good chats with Ben, and also I was lucky enough to go to a Vern Gambetta workshop that Brendan Chaplin organised up in Leeds in about 2013, and it was just 2 days of quite a small group of us actually, probably about 15 of us, and Vern just taking us through his like movement mastery system, and he was just so enjoyable. He's such a good character, like so much energy, like straight to the point with what he wants to do, but also in quite a humorous way. It's just a really nice way of coaching. So that I'm familiar with those two guys, mate. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's really useful. And for all the listeners, like if you aren't familiar with those guys, definitely check out their social media pages or their websites, because I think you could learn a lot from finding out a bit more. So whilst we're talking about information, mate, I mean we're nearly there. I've got a couple more questions for you, and I'll let you go.
No problem.
So, what would you say your top 3 resources for information are at the moment?
Well, to be honest, mate, obviously the working in professional sport does take up a lot of your time, so I sort of don't have a lot of time, and to be honest, I don't particularly enjoy just sitting down and grinding through textbooks or books, to be honest. So I tend to be a bit more of like a dipper when it comes to like reading. So, for example, I might have a particular issue at work or something that's intrigued me at work, and I'll hamstring injury and I'm part of the hamstring rehab, then I might go away and just delve in and see what's new and what's coming out on hamstrings. So I'm not a particularly big reader, but what I do spend a lot of time is in the car. So I normally have about an hour and a half commute either way each day. So I'm in the car for about 3 hours a day most days. So I found that, what you're doing now, mate, the podcasts, and there's a few different ones I listen to. Am I allowed to say any names?
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead, mate. That's fine, yeah.
So, obviously, one of the main ones I've sort of been listening to is Rob Pacey, so Pacey Performance.
Yeah.
Listening to, I think he's on about 200 and something now, so he's done some really good podcasts. I tend to find best use of my time in the car is probably podcasts or, like I've already touched on, talking to other practitioners. So I spend a lot of my time making calls to other guys working in sport, working in football, discussing how things are going. If I've got issues, I might ask their opinion and vice versa. So I find that just like communicating and sort of listening to other people that have, like we said, having the same sort of issues is a great way to sort of learn and develop. This modern day and age, mate, I think things like Twitter and that are actually pretty insightful a lot of the time. I mean, you've got to be careful how much of it and what you take on board, but I think there's some real good insights to certain aspects people are putting on Twitter now. You get some real, good insightful information if you look in the right places, and it's quite digestible and quite easy to manage. So again, it's quite accessible. Just sitting at work, I've got a 10-minute break just to flick through Twitter and see if anything pops up on sports science or training or nutrition, and just do a little bit of reading. And then another thing we tend to do at our place is we run in-house sort of CPD workshops, normally monthly, so that'll be sports science and medical. And each month, a different member of staff will deliver on a different subject area. Say for about an hour, but it'll be trying to present sort of the latest research that's around that particular topic. So again, say we were talking about hamstring injuries, it would just be looking at all the latest research and presenting that back to the group, really. So we try and sort of keep ourselves up to date with the latest sort of scientific papers. I've talked about podcasts and Twitter probably not being the most scientific in terms of actual research, but still pretty insightful.
It's got to be realistic, hasn't it? I mean, it's got to be able to fit into your lifestyle and got to fit into your daily routine. And for some people, you can sit down and spare 2 hours to read 2 journals back to back. Then great, but I know that I can't, and it is, I'll try to occasionally if I have to find out more about something, then I'll make the time. But I'm exactly like you, mate. Really, you just have to kind of use what time that you've got available and use what resources that you have available at that time. To try and continuously learn. And that's one thing I picked up on what you said earlier. Like you've got to you have to always keep learning in this profession because there's so much stuff changing all the time that you need to try your best to stay on top of it. So you could apply the latest and the best methods in your practice, and that is difficult. But I suppose that's, as a scientist, inverted commas, that we are, it's necessary and expected, isn't it?
Yeah, like we both said it there, that the industry is constantly changing, constantly evolving, and if you're not staying on top of it, then ultimately you will get left behind. So even though it can be difficult at times to sort of keep up to date with everything that's going on, I think, like you said, a lot of stuff comes through social media now. So it's as much as I'm not the best on social media, I find it a bit of a godsend in terms of getting access to information and little things coming up on there that maybe I haven't seen or I haven't done, and it might even evoke something that you see, for example, that you've not heard of, that then inspires you to go and read about that particular subject area or a particular topic. So yeah, for me, really useful, and like you said, maximising your time. 3 hours a day in a car is a lot of wasted time. So for me, that's my time. I see is that if I'm going to try and get some learning done, or maximise that time and make use of it.
Awesome. So I'm just conscious of time, mate, because I know that you're doing some deluxe chauffeuring tonight for your other half and your daughter. So I don't want to keep you too long.
No, that's all right. I think I've just received a text saying that I think they've actually gone to see Little Mix in concert tonight. So I've just got a text saying that the Little Mix aren't actually coming on till 8:30.
Oh,
so
right.
I've probably got about another 4 hours to kill, mate. To be honest.
Okay. Well, I won't stop you from going to sneak in the back door, mate, and watch them. because we all know that's why you're there.
It took a little bit to learn, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. So just a couple of quick fire ones to finish then, mate. Like, what would you say at the moment your top 3 sports performance exercises or drills are that you feel that you use the most?
Well, obviously, from a football conditioning point of view, obviously we have certain exercise and movements we look at from like a strength point of view, so in the gym, and then obviously certain exercises that we want to implement sort of across the week on a pitch base. So if I give you a couple of examples in the gym and then a couple of pitch base examples, is that all right?
Yeah, that's great, mate.
So we ultimately, I'm a big believer of getting players stronger, making them more robust. So we tend to have two strength sessions a week, and within those strength sessions, we'll have 3 sort of non-negotiable exercises that we want all players to perform, and that will normally take the format of like a bilateral compound lift. So talking about, for example, a squat variation or a deadlift. Some players it's difficult with either of those movements or can't actual load, may just do a leg press or something like that. We talk about individualisation there. They'll have like a unilateral compound movement, so that might be a single leg Bulgarian squat. It might be a single leg squat. It might be a single leg press. Again, we talked about, and then it's more of like a posterior. The third one will be a posterior chain exercise. So normally it will either be like a stiff leg deadlift or a Romanian deadlift or a Nordic. So we've got like three key movements we look for within the gym. There will be obviously supplementary exercises within that, around that as well, looking at certain muscles and certain joints. But they're the sort of 3 go-to that we want all players to be sort of performing on a weekly basis. More from a pitch base, so we've talked about having sort of a high-speed running exposure. So we try and make sure that across the training week we'll definitely get some sprinting exercises in there. So it'll generally be early on in the week, so for example on a Tuesday. So we like to have a little bit of acceleration, deceleration and change of direction work, and also possibly some max velocity work in there as well. So we're making sure players are getting above sort of 90% of their maximum velocity within the training session. Again, just from like a conditioning and a robustness point of view, giving them that exposure. And then also, like we touched on it, there may be some sort of either maximal aerobic speed runs or some sort of high speed running, just again from that injury prevention point of view. So normally, again, if we've got a clear week, we'll try and get both those, some velocity and some high speed running within a session that week.
Just to kind of wrap up, what would you say your top 3 pieces of advice are you would give in life, exercise or sport?
I think, well, initially, mate, one that applies to everything, and it's probably going to sound a little bit general, but I mean, just being a good person. So what I mean by that is being honest, transparent, trustworthy, and reliable. I think the sort of key factors of just being a good person and building, and I say it comes down to building those relationships with people is pretty key. I think next one is work ethic. So having a good work ethic, working hard, and being dedicated, whether that's to sport or to what you do in life, I think will get you a long way. I said by no means am I the most intelligent practitioner out there. I feel I've made a career out of the game out of sort of ticking that box, or probably those first 2 boxes. I'd like to think anyway. So one thing I've always been prepared to do is graft, work hard, and sort of push myself as far as I can and put the hours in. Really, I think that's pretty key. Both towards my training, which sort of taking a backseat these days as I'm getting a little bit older, but also obviously primarily towards the job. I think the third one is just being prepared to put yourself out there, and we talked about obviously getting experiences, gaining internships, but put yourself out there, get yourself experience, go on as many workshops, as many conferences, go and talk to as many people as you can, get as many insights as you can, and try and do that across an array of different sports as well, or not necessarily sports, but go and put yourself out there, find more about nutrition, find more about psychology, more about training. So the more areas you can develop, I think the better.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing those, mate. I think the first one I probably agree with more than any of the others is you've got to be likeable and approachable with the people around you that you spend each day with. I think if they don't feel comfortable in your company and feel that they can't ask you questions or come to you for advice, you're gonna no matter how much you know, it's going to be very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, totally agree. And I think we've touched on that a fair bit throughout. And I think knowledge is. If you haven't got those sort of personal skills, then your knowledge isn't going to come through. You're not going to be able to apply that with the people you're working with. So I think that's pretty critical on that one, mate.
So finally, mate, if people want to get in touch with you, where can I find you?
I am on Twitter, although I don't tweet much. Occasional tweet I'll put out. I'm more of a follower than a tweeter. But I think that's at Bloomy1981 is my Twitter account. Probably the best way I'd say with that.
Yeah, great. That's great, mate. I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can DM you or something if they have any questions.
No problem.
Well, I just finally want to say thanks for your time, mate. I've really enjoyed having you on, and I'm sorry if I've kept you a little bit longer than I said I would. But we had a few technical issues with getting Skype to work, so thanks for bearing with me, and I hope you don't get too bored sat in the car park for another few hours. Wait. But yeah, in all seriousness, mate, thanks a lot. I've really enjoyed chatting to you, and speak to you soon.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Hope I haven't waffled on too much with some of those answers. So hopefully it's been insightful for the listeners.
Thanks for listening to the 6th episode. We hope you enjoyed the show. Please don't hesitate to leave us a rating or review on your listening platform of choice. If you haven't already, please check out our website. We have weekly blogs on our blog page. You can sign up to our monthly newsletter via our sign up page. Our online store consists of personal coach, training programs, nutrition plans, interactive training systems, toolbox, and coming very soon, membership packages. We also have several social media platforms: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Links to all these can be found at the bottom of every page on our website or via any search engine. That's all for now. Until next time, take care.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.